creaking door swings open in the dead of night, revealing a silhouette with a glinting knife. But is it a weapon or a mere butter knife? Secrets lurk in every corner. Welcome to the story of Miss Marple and the mystery of the Buttercup boarding house. Grab a cup of tea, take a seat, and enjoy the suspenseful tale unfolding before you. If you're hooked and enjoying the mystery, hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us. Chapter 1. Arrival at Buttercup Boarding House. Miss Jane Marple stepped off the rattling train onto the quaint platform of St. Mary Meads, neighbouring village, her sharp eyes scanning the misty afternoon air. At 70-something, with her fluffy white hair neatly pinned under a sensible hat and her knitting bag slung over one arm, she looked every bit the harmless spinster aunt. But those who knew her, and there were few who truly did, understood that beneath that mild exterior lay a mind as keen as a detective's magnifying glass. She had come to the Buttercup boarding house not for rest, though her niece had insisted on it after a bout of rheumatism, but because whispers of odd happenings had reached her ears through the village grapevine. A peaceful retreat, her niece had called it, but Miss Marple sensed otherwise. The house itself was a charming Victorian relic, painted buttery yellow with climbing roses framing the windows, nestled at the edge of a sleepy lane lined with hedgerows. As she approached, pulling her small suitcase behind her, the front door opened to reveal Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, the proprietress, a plump woman in her 50s, with a forced smile that didn't quite reach her anxious eyes. "Miss Marple, how delightful to have you! Do come in out of that chill," Mrs. Hargrove said, ushering her inside with a flurry of hospitality. The foyer smelled of polished wood and faint lavender, but Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in the woman's hands as she took her coat. The boarding house was home to a handful of long-term residents and the occasional visitor, or so the brochure claimed. Miss Marple was shown to her room on the second floor, a cosy space with floral wallpaper, a four-poster bed, and a window overlooking the garden where buttercups nodded in the breeze. As she unpacked her few belongings, knitting needles, a well-worn Bible, and a notebook disguised as a recipe collection, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house held more than met the eye. Downstairs in the parlour, she met the other guests over afternoon tea. Mr. Reginald Thorne, a retired banker with a pompous moustache and a habit of quoting Shakespeare at inopportune moments. Young Miss Lydia Finch, a wide-eyed typist from London, seeking respite from city life, her fingers stained with ink. Dr. Arthur Bellamy, a bespectacled physician in his 40s, who seemed perpetually distracted, fiddling with his pocket watch, and the enigmatic Colonel Hugh Bannister, a war veteran with a limp and a gruff demeanour, who spent his days poring over old maps. As they sipped their tea from delicate china cups, conversation flowed lightly at first. Talk of the weather, the latest village fete, and the excellent scones baked by the housemaid, young Polly. But Miss Marple's ears perked up when Lydia mentioned a peculiar incident from the night before. "I swear I heard footsteps in the attic after midnight," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "And this morning, one of the butter dishes was shattered on the kitchen floor, as if thrown in anger." The others dismissed it with chuckles. Mr. Thorne blamed the wind, Dr. Bellamy suggested mice, and Colonel Bannister grunted about overactive imaginations. Mrs. Hargrove, however, paled and quickly changed the subject to the upcoming garden party. Miss Marple said nothing, merely nodding politely while her mind catalogued the details: the shattered dish, the footsteps, and the way Mrs. Hargrove's eyes darted toward the staircase. She recalled similar signs from her past observations in St. Mary Mead, small anomalies that often unravelled into larger mysteries, like the time a misplaced teacup led to uncovering a poisoner's plot. That evening, as the group gathered for dinner in the dining room, adorned with antique silver and flickering candlelight, Miss Marple observed the dynamics more closely. Practical tip for any budding sleuth: always watch the hands. They reveal nervousness through fidgeting or clenched fists. Colonel Bannister's were steady but scarred, suggesting a military past with hidden traumas. Dr. Bellamy dropped his fork twice, his mind elsewhere, perhaps on a secret worry. Lydia chattered nervously about her dreams of becoming a novelist, while Mr. Thorne dominated with tales of his banking exploits, though Miss Marple noted his exaggerated gestures hid a certain insecurity. Mrs. Hargrove served the meal herself: roast, beef, potatoes, and buttered vegetables, with Polly assisting quietly in the background. As dessert was cleared, a sudden thud echoed from upstairs, causing everyone to freeze. Just the house settling, Mrs. Hargrove assured them hastily, but Miss Marple caught the flash of fear in her eyes. Excusing herself early, Miss Marple retired to her room, where she sat by the window, knitting an intricate scarf pattern that mirrored the tangled threads of human nature she so loved to unravel. Little did she know, this was merely the calm before the storm, whispers of a missing heirloom, a shadowed past, and a midnight visitor would soon draw her deeper into the enigma of Buttercup boarding house. But that's for our next chapter, where the first clue emerges in the most unexpected place. Chapter 2. The Missing Heirloom. Miss Marple awoke early the next morning, her mind already sifting through the previous day's observations. She dressed quietly, her fingers deftly buttoning her cardigan, and made her way downstairs before the rest of the house stirred. In the dining room, she found Polly, the young housemaid, polishing the silverware with a distracted air. Noticing Miss Marple, Polly started, nearly dropping a spoon. S.G. "Good morning, Polly," Miss Marple said gently, settling into a chair with her knitting. "You seem troubled. Is something amiss?" Polly hesitated, her cheeks flushing. "It's nothing, Ma'am, just the mistress is in a state. Her grandmother's locket went missing yesterday. Gold with a ruby clasp, kept in a velvet box in her room. She says it's worth a fortune. But it's the sentiment that matters most. She's been searching everywhere." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking rhythmically. "When did she last see it?" 2 days ago, ma'am. She checked it before bed, as always. Yesterday morning, it was gone. Polly's voice dropped to a whisper. She thinks one of the guests took it, but she won't say who. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her expression remained mild. A missing heirloom was precisely the kind of thread that could unravel a larger tapestry of secrets. She thanked Polly and, after a light breakfast of toast and tea, decided to observe the guests more closely. At mid-morning, they gathered in the parlour for a game of bridge, organised by Mrs. Hargrove to keep spirits high. Miss Marple declined to play, citing her preference for knitting, but positioned herself near the card table, her ears attuned to every word. Mr. Thorne was in high spirits, dealing cards with theatrical flourishes and quoting Macbeth between bids. Lydia Finch partnered with him, fumbled her cards, her nerves evident in her tight smile. Dr. Bellamy, paired with Colonel Bannister, played with mechanical precision, though his eyes often strayed to his pocket watch, as if counting down to something. Colonel Bannister, meanwhile, was gruff, snapping at Lydia when she misbid. Mrs. Hargrove hovered nearby, offering tea and biscuits, but her glances toward the guests were laced with suspicion. During a break, Miss Marple casually steered the conversation toward valuables. "I do hope this house is secure," she said, her tone innocent. "I've heard of heirlooms going missing in such charming places." Mrs. Hargrove's teapot wavered slightly. "Oh, we're quite safe here," she said quickly. "Just a bit of misplacing things now and then." But Lydia's eyes widened. "You mean like that locket you mentioned, Mrs. Hargrove? I heard you talking to Polly about it." The room tensed. Mr. Thorne coughed loudly, adjusting his tie. Dr. Bellamy's watch clicked shut with a snap. Colonel Bannister merely grunted, but his fingers tightened around his teacup. Mrs. Hargrove forced a laugh. "Just a family trinket. It'll turn up, I'm sure." Miss Marple said nothing, but her mind catalogued their reactions. Later, as the group dispersed, she lingered in the parlour, noticing a small scrap of paper under the table. She retrieved it discreetly, a torn piece of notepaper with the words "Meet me at midnight" scrawled in hurried ink. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but it was a clue, and Miss Marple tucked it into her knitting bag. That afternoon, she took a stroll through the garden, hoping to clear her thoughts. There, she overheard a heated exchange behind the rose trellis. It was Dr. Bellamy and Lydia, their voices low but intense. "You shouldn't have come here," Dr. Bellamy hissed. "It's too risky." "I had no choice," Lydia whispered back. "You know why." Miss Marple stepped back silently, her presence unnoticed. A secret meeting, a missing locket, and now this cryptic, our conversation. Pieces of a puzzle were beginning to form. She returned to the house just as Mrs. Hargrove announced an impromptu evening reading in the library, where Mr. Thorne would recite poetry. Miss Marple attended, her eyes scanning the guests. Mr. Thorne's performance was grandiose, but she noticed Colonel Bannister slip out mid-recitation, his limp more pronounced as he hurried away. Curious, she excused herself shortly after, citing fatigue. Instead of retiring, Miss Marple positioned herself near the staircase, hidden in the shadows of a tall bookcase. At precisely 11:30, she saw Colonel Bannister descend, carrying a small flashlight. He moved toward the back of the house, where a locked door led to the cellar. Moments later, Dr. Bellamy followed, glancing over his shoulder. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Were they connected to the locket's disappearance? Or was this about the midnight meeting hinted at in the note? She returned to her room, her mind racing. The locket was more than a sentimental trinket. It was a catalyst, stirring up hidden motives among the guests. As she sat by her window, knitting in the moonlight, she resolved to keep a closer watch. Tomorrow, she would find a way to explore the cellar and uncover what secrets it held. But that's a tale for the next chapter, where a surprising discovery throws suspicion in a new direction. Chapter 3. The cellar's secret miss. Marple rose with the dawn, her mind fixed on the shadowy figures she'd seen heading toward the cellar the previous night. She dressed in her usual tweed skirt and cardigan, her movements deliberate as she tucked her knitting needles and the mysterious note into her bag. Breakfast was a quiet affair, with the guests distracted. Mr. Thorne buried in a newspaper, Lydia scribbling in a small journal, Dr. Bellamy staring into his tea, and Colonel Bannister absent altogether, claiming a headache. Mrs. Hargrove bustled about, her cheerfulness strained as she served porridge and toast. Miss Marple seized the moment to inquire about the house's history, hoping to glean information about the cellar. "Such a charming old place," she remarked to Mrs. Hargrove. "Does it have any hidden nooks, cellars or attics full of stories?" Mrs. Hargrove's smile faltered. "Oh, just the usual storage cellar. Nothing exciting. Old furniture, some wine bottles. It's locked to keep guests safe. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. But her curiosity deepened. A locked cellar, visited in secret, suggested more than dusty relics. After breakfast, she lingered in the hallway near the cellar door, pretending to admire a faded portrait of Mrs. Hargrove's grandmother, whose locket was now missing. When the coast was clear, she tested the door, locked, as expected. But she noticed fresh scratches around the keyhole, as if someone had tampered with it recently. Filing this away, she resolved to find a way inside. Her opportunity came that afternoon when Mrs. Hargrove announced she'd be running errands in the village, with Polly busy in the kitchen and the other guests scattered. Mr. Thorne napping in the parlour, Lydia writing in the garden, Dr. Bellamy at his medical books, and Colonel Bannister still in his room. Miss Marple slipped into the kitchen. There, on a hook by the pantry, hung a ring of keys. One, smaller and brass, looked promising. She borrowed it with the stealth of a seasoned observer, her heart beating a little faster as she approached the cellar door. The key turned with a satisfying click. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Miss Marple, ever practical, had brought a small flashlight from her knitting bag. Its beam illuminated damp stone walls and a musty scent as she carefully navigated the steps. At the bottom, she found a cluttered space, crates of old bottles, a cracked mirror, and stacks of moth-eaten rugs. But in the far corner, half hidden behind a broken chair, was a wooden chest, its lock freshly broken. Kneeling, she opened it to reveal a collection of papers, letters, receipts, and a faded photograph of a young woman resembling Mrs. Hargrove, holding the very locket Polly had described. Beneath the papers was a small leather pouch containing a single ruby earring, its match presumably part of the missing locket. Before she could examine further, a shadow fell across the stairs. Miss Marple switched off her flashlight and ducked. Behind a crate, her breath shallow. Heavy footsteps descended. Colonel Bannister's uneven gait was unmistakable. He moved straight to the chest, muttering under his breath as he rummaged through it. "Where is it?" he growled, clearly unaware of her presence. Finding nothing, he cursed softly and retreated upstairs, locking the door behind him. Miss Marple waited a moment before emerging, her mind racing. The Colonel's search suggested he knew about the chest, but had he taken the locket, or was he looking for it too? And why was the earring left behind? She pocketed the photograph and earring for safekeeping, then carefully returned the key to the kitchen before anyone noticed its absence. Back in her room, she examined her finds. The photograph's back bore a faint inscription, "To Eleanor, with love, 1895. The earring, though valuable, was an odd solitary item, hinting at a story of loss or theft. That evening, the atmosphere at dinner was tense. Mrs. Hargrove, back from the village, seemed distracted, her eyes lingering on Colonel Bannister, who ate in silence. Dr. Bellamy dropped his napkin twice, his hands unsteady, while Lydia avoided eye contact, focusing on her plate. Mr. Thorne, oblivious to the undercurrents, launched into a monologue about his days in banking, but even he faltered when a loud crash echoed from the kitchen. Polly rushed in, apologizing for a dropped tray, but Miss Marple caught the girl's frightened glance toward Mrs. Hargrove. Later, as the guests retired, Miss Marple overheard another whispered conversation, this time between Mrs. Hargrove and Polly in the hallway. "You're sure you didn't touch it?" Mrs. Hargrove pressed. Polly's voice trembled as she insisted, "I swear, ma'am, I only dusted the room." Miss Marple made a mental note, Polly was either innocent or a skilled liar. Either way, the locket's disappearance was stirring unrest, and the cellar held clues to more than just a theft. As she sat knitting by her window, the moon casting long shadows, Miss Marple pieced together her thoughts. The chest, the earring, the Colonel's stealth, and the mysterious note all pointed to a web of secrets. Someone in this house was hiding more than a missing heirloom, perhaps a motive tied to the past. Tomorrow she would confront one of the guests, but carefully to avoid tipping her hand. The next chapter promises a bold move that uncovers a hidden truth, drawing Miss Marple closer to the heart of the mystery. Chapter 4. A bold confrontation. Miss Marple sat by her window in the early morning light, her knitting needles moving with a steady rhythm as she mulled over the previous day's discoveries. The ruby earring and the photograph from the cellar chest were safely tucked inside her knitting bag, alongside the cryptic note about a midnight meeting. Each item was a piece of a puzzle, but the picture remained incomplete. She knew she had to act decisively today, observe less, engage more. Confronting one of the guests might shake loose a vital clue, but it required finesse to avoid raising suspicion. She decided on Dr. Bellamy, whose nervous demeanour and distracted glances suggested he was hiding something. His late-night venture to the cellar with Colonel Bannister also made him a key figure in her suspicions. After a quiet breakfast, where the guests seemed more subdued than usual, Mr. Thorne reading a letter with a furrowed brow, Lydia sketching absent-mindedly on a napkin, and Colonel Bannister eating quickly before excusing himself, Miss Marple found her opportunity. Dr. Bellamy lingered in the dining room, adjusting his spectacles and checking his pocket watch for the third time in 10 minutes. She approached, with her usual air of harmless curiosity, clutching her knitting as if it were a shield. "Good morning, Dr. Bellamy," she said warmly, settling into a chair beside him. "I couldn't help noticing you seem a bit preoccupied." "I do hope everything is all right." Dr. Bellamy started, his watch slipping from his fingers to the table with a clatter. "Oh, Miss Marple, just lost in thought. Medical matters, you know." His smile was thin, and his eyes darted toward the door. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression gentle but probing. "I understand. Though I must say, this house has a way of stirring the mind. All these little mysteries, like Mrs. Hargrove's missing locket. It's curious, isn't it, how such things vanish without a trace?" The doctor's face paled slightly, and he adjusted his collar. "Yes, quite unfortunate. Probably just misplaced." His voice was too quick, betraying unease. "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "But I couldn't help overhearing. Miss Finch mentioned strange noises at night, and I myself noticed. Well, let's just say some guests seem to wander when the house is quiet." She paused, watching his reaction closely. "The cellar, for instance, seems to attract attention." Dr. Bellamy's hand froze mid-air, reaching for his tea. "The cellar," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what you mean." Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her eyes kind but unyielding. "I'm an old woman, Doctor, and I notice things, like how you and Colonel Bannister were seen heading that way last night. And then there's this." She reached into her bag and produced the torn note with "Meet me at midnight" scrawled on it, holding it just long enough for him to see before tucking it away. "I found it in the parlour. I wonder what it's about." The doctor's composure cracked. His hands trembled, and he stood abruptly, knocking over his teacup. I have no idea about any note," he stammered. "And the cellar, I was just checking on some old medical supplies Mrs. Hargrove asked me to store. Nothing more. He grabbed his watch and hurried out, muttering about an appointment. Miss Marple watched him go, her needles clicking thoughtfully. His reaction confirmed her suspicions. He was involved in something, though whether it was the locket's theft or another secret, she couldn't yet say. She decided to follow up by speaking with Lydia Finch, whose nervous whispers with Dr. Bellamy in the garden suggested a connection. She found Lydia in the library, curled up in an armchair with her journal, her pen scratching furiously. "Good morning, my dear," Miss Marple said, settling nearby with her knitting. "You seem quite absorbed in your writing. A story, perhaps?" Lydia looked up, startled, and closed her journal quickly. "Oh, just notes. Ideas for a novel. Nothing special." Miss Marple smiled. "You have a writer's eye, I can tell. You notice things, don't you? Like those footsteps you mentioned in the attic. Or perhaps other oddities around the house." Lydia's fingers tightened around her journal. I don't know what you mean, Miss Marple. It's just an old house. Creaky floors, that's all." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but probing. "But I wonder if you've seen anything else unusual. Say, someone acting out of sorts. Dr. Bellamy, for instance, seems rather jumpy." Lydia's eyes widened and she hesitated before speaking. He's just stressed. He told me he's been working on a difficult case, that's all." Her voice lacked conviction, and she quickly excused herself, claiming she needed fresh air. Miss Marple didn't press further, but Lydia's evasiveness added another thread to the web. She spent the afternoon in the parlour, knitting and observing as the guests went about their day. Mr. Thorne received a telegram that made him scowl, muttering about insolent demands before pocketing it. Colonel Bannister returned from a walk, his boots muddy despite the dry weather, suggesting he'd been somewhere off the beaten path. Mrs. Hargrove, meanwhile, was seen speaking sharply to Polly in the kitchen, her voice carrying through the closed door. "If you know anything, you must tell me." Polly's muffled reply was tearful, denying any knowledge. As evening approached, Miss Marple decided to test another angle. She approached Mrs. Hargrove during a lull in the dinner preparations, offering to help set the table. While arranging cutlery, she casually mentioned the photograph she'd found in the cellar, describing the woman who resembled Mrs. Hargrove. "Such a lovely picture," she said. "It must be precious to you, like that locket." Mrs. Hargrove's hands froze on a stack of plates. "Photograph?" she said, her voice tight. "I don't know what you're talking about. The cellar's just storage." Miss Marple nodded, feigning confusion. "My mistake, perhaps. Though it's odd how things turn up in unexpected places, isn't it? Like that earring I saw Polly polishing. Ruby, I believe." Mrs. Hargrove's face drained of colour. "Earring? Polly never mentioned. I must speak with her." She hurried off, leaving Miss Marple to finish setting the table alone. Dinner was a strained affair, with conversation stilted. Dr. Bellamy avoided Miss Marple's gaze. Lydia barely spoke, and Colonel Bannister glowered at his plate. Mr. Thorne tried to lighten the mood with a story about a banking scandal, but it fell flat. After dessert, Miss Marple excused herself early, claiming she needed rest. Instead, she stationed herself near the staircase again, hidden by the same bookcase. Around 10 o'clock, she saw Polly slip out of the kitchen, carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. The girl glanced around nervously before heading toward the back door. Moments later, Colonel Bannister followed, his flashlight flickering. As he moved, Miss Marple's heart quickened. Were they meeting someone? Was the bundle connected to the locket or the seller's secrets? She couldn't follow without risking discovery, so she returned to her room, her mind racing. The confrontation with Dr. Bellamy had rattled him. Lydia's evasiveness hinted at hidden knowledge, and Mrs. Hargrove's reaction to the photograph and earring suggested a deeper connection to the past. The Colonel and Polly's late night movements only thickened the plot. As she sat knitting in the moonlight, Miss Marple resolved to focus on Polly next. The housemaid's fear and the bundle suggested she was a key player, willingly or not. Tomorrow, she would find a way to gain Polly's trust and uncover what she knew. But that's a tale for the next chapter, where an unexpected confession turns the mystery on its head. Chapter 5. An unexpected confession miss. Marple woke with a clear purpose, her mind fixed on Polly, the young housemaid whose nervous demeanour and mysterious bundle had caught her attention. She dressed quickly, choosing a soft blue shawl to appear, as unthreatening as possible, and tucked her knitting bag under her arm. The house was stirring slowly, with the faint clink of dishes signalling breakfast preparations. Miss Marple knew she needed to approach Polly carefully. Too direct, and the girl might clam up. Too subtle, and she'd miss the truth. Her plan was to find a moment alone with Polly, away from Mrs. Hargrove's watchful eyes, and coax her into sharing what she knew. At breakfast, the mood was heavier than ever. Mr. Thorne was absent, having left early for a supposed meeting in the village. Lydia picked at her eggs, her journal nowhere in sight, her face pale as if she hadn't slept. Dr. Bellamy was overly polite, offering to pass the jam with forced cheer, but his eyes flickered nervously toward the door. Colonel Bannister ate, in silence, his jaw tight, as if bracing for something. Mrs. Hargrove moved between the dining room and kitchen, her usual warmth replaced by curt efficiency. Miss Marple seized her chance when Polly emerged to clear the plates, her hands trembling slightly as she stacked them. "Polly, my dear," Miss Marple said softly, following her into the kitchen under the pretense of helping. "You look worn out. Is everything all right?" Polly glanced around, ensuring Mrs. Hargrove was out of earshot. "I'm fine, ma'am," she mumbled, but her eyes betrayed fear. "Just busy is all." Miss Marple set down a plate and leaned closer, her voice gentle. "I couldn't help noticing you seemed upset last night, carrying that bundle. And with all this talk of Mrs. Hargrove's locket, I wonder if you've seen something you're afraid to share." Polly's hands froze on a teacup, her breath catching. "I don't know nothing about the locket, ma'am, I swear." Her voice was a whisper, her eyes darting to the door. Miss Marple placed a reassuring hand on Polly's arm. "I'm not here to accuse, dear, but I know a frightened girl when I see one. Whatever it is, you can tell me. I'm just an old lady who listens." The words seemed to break a dam. Polly's shoulders slumped, and tears welled in her eyes. "It's not what you think," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't steal the locket, but I saw something I shouldn't have. 2 nights ago, I was tidying the upstairs hall when I saw Colonel Bannister coming out of Mrs. Hargrove's room. He didn't see me, but he was holding something small, shiny, in his hand. I thought it was the locket, but I was too scared to say anything. He's got such a temper." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she kept her expression calm. "Did you tell Mrs. Hargrove?" Polly shook her head. "No, ma'am. She'd think I was making it up, or worse, she'd confront him, and he'd know it was me. And then last night." She hesitated, wiping her eyes. "I found something in the laundry. A man's handkerchief. embroidered with HB. It had a spot of red wax on it, like from a candle. I wrapped it in a cloth to hide it, but I don't know what to do. Miss Marple nodded, piecing it together. The initials HB pointed to Colonel Hugh Bannister, and the red wax could link to the cellar, where she'd noticed a melted candle stub near the chest. "You've done the right thing telling me," she said. "Where's the handkerchief now?" Polly bit her lip. "Hidden in my room, under the mattress. I was going to give it to Mrs. Hargrove, but I'm scared she'll think I took the locket myself." Miss Marple patted her hand. "Keep it hidden for now, dear. I'll handle it discreetly." She sent Polly back to her duties, her mind racing. The Colonel's presence in Mrs. Hargrove's room, combined with the handkerchief, was damning, but it wasn't proof of theft yet. She needed to see the handkerchief and confirm its significance. Later that morning, while the guests were occupied, Lydia in the garden, Dr. Bellamy writing letters, and Colonel Bannister reading in the library, Miss Marple slipped upstairs to Polly's small room in the attic. She felt a pang of guilt for invading the girl's privacy, but the handkerchief was crucial. Under the mattress, she found the cloth bundle Polly described. Unwrapping it revealed a white linen handkerchief, monogrammed with HB and stained with a smudge of red wax. But there was more, a tiny key, no larger than a thimble, tucked inside the folds. It looked like it might fit a jewelry box or small lock, perhaps even the locket itself. Miss Marple pocketed the key and handkerchief, replacing the bundle to avoid suspicion. Back in her room, she examined the items closely. The wax matched. The candle stub from the cellar and the key's delicate design suggested it was part of something valuable. Her thoughts turned to Colonel Bannister. His gruff manner and late-night wanderings painted him as a prime suspect. But why would a retired military man steal a locket? Was it greed, or something personal tied to Mrs. Hargrove's past? That afternoon, Miss Marple decided to test the waters. She joined the guests for tea in the parlour, where Colonel Bannister was recounting a war story to a bored-looking Dr. Bellamy. She waited for a lull, then casually remarked, "I found the most curious thing while helping Polly with the laundry. A handkerchief with a rather distinctive monogram. It's surprising what turns up in unexpected places." Colonel Bannister's teacup paused mid-air, his eyes narrowing. "Laundry gets mixed up," he said gruffly. "No telling whose it is." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone innocent, though the red wax on it was quite distinctive. "Reminds me of the candles used in old houses like this one." The Colonel's jaw tightened, and he stood abruptly, muttering about needing air. Dr. Bellamy watched him go, his own expression uneasy. Lydia, who had joined them, spilled her tea, her hands shaking as she mopped it up. Mrs. Hargrove, entering with a fresh pot, caught the tail end of the conversation and frowned. "Wax? What's this about?" she asked. "Oh, just an observation," Miss Marple said lightly, deflecting. But the seed was planted, and the reactions told her she was on the right track. That evening, as the guests gathered for a simple supper, Miss Marple noticed Colonel Bannister avoiding her gaze, while Dr. Bellamy whispered something to Lydia, who nodded nervously. Mrs. Hargrove announced that Mr. Thorne would return late, having been delayed in the village. The absence of one guest only heightened the tension among the others. As Miss Marple retired for the night, she sat by her window, knitting and reflecting. Polly's confession had shifted the focus to Colonel Bannister, but the tiny key suggested a deeper layer to the mystery. Perhaps the locket wasn't just stolen, but opened, its contents the true prize. The handkerchief and wax tied the Colonel to the cellar, but Dr. Bellamy's and Lydia's nervousness hinted at their own secrets. Tomorrow she would explore the key's purpose and confront Colonel Bannister directly, risking his temper to uncover the truth. The next chapter will reveal a startling discovery that changes everything, pulling Miss Marple deeper into the web of deceit. Chapter 6. The Key's Secret. Miss Marple sat in her room, the tiny key from Polly's bundle glinting in the morning light as she turned it over in her hands. HB handkerchief, red wax, and now this key. Perhaps the locket holds more than sentimental value. She tucked the key into her knitting bag, alongside the ruby earring and photograph, and prepared for the day. Her plan was clear. Confront Colonel Bannister about his nocturnal wanderings and the handkerchief, and test the key on any lock that might fit. The Colonel's reaction at tea had confirmed her suspicions. He was hiding something, and she intended to find out what. Breakfast was a tense affair, with Mr. Thorne back from the village, his mood sour as he complained about unreliable post. Lydia kept her eyes on her plate, while Dr. Bellamy excused himself early, citing a headache. Colonel Bannister, however, lingered, his gaze fixed on his coffee as if it held answers. Mrs. Hargrove moved about with forced cheer, but her hands betrayed her, clutching a serving spoon too tightly. Miss Marple waited until the Colonel stepped outside for his morning walk, then followed at a discreet distance, her sensible shoes silent on the gravel path. She found him by the garden shed, inspecting a rusty padlock on the door. "Good morning, Colonel," she called, her voice bright but firm. "I see you're taking an interest in the grounds. Looking for something specific?" Colonel Bannister turned sharply, his face hardening. "Just checking the property, Miss Marple. Old habits from my army days. Always ensure the perimeter's secure." Miss Marple smiled, undeterred. "A commendable habit, though I wonder if your checks extend to the house itself. Say, Mrs. Hargrove's room, or the cellar." She paused, watching his eyes narrow. "I found a handkerchief with your initials, marked with red wax. It's curious, don't you think, how such things appear amid talk of a missing locket?" The Colonel's hand tightened on his cane, his voice low and gruff. "You're meddling in things that don't concern you, ma'am. That handkerchief could belong to anyone. As for the cellar, I was looking for a bottle of wine Mrs. Hargrove asked me to fetch. Nothing more." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression mild but probing. "Of course. Though I heard you were seen leaving Mrs. Hargrove's room too, nights ago, holding something shiny. I wonder what it was." Colonel Bannister's face reddened, and for a moment she thought he might storm off. Instead, he leaned closer, his voice a harsh whisper. "You're a nosy old woman, Miss Marple, and you do well to mind your own business. I took nothing from that room. I was returning a book she'd lent me. That's all." He turned, abruptly, and limped back to the house, leaving Miss Marple thoughtful but unconvinced. Determined to test the key, she waited until mid-morning when the house was quiet. Mrs. Hargrove was in the village again, and the guests were scattered. Mr. Thorne in the parlour, Lydia writing in her room, and Dr. Bellamy out for a walk. Miss Marple slipped into Mrs. Hargrove's private sitting room, a small space off the main hall she'd seen the proprietress enter frequently. The room was tidy, with a mahogany desk, a locked jewellery box, and shelves of family heirlooms. She tried the key in the jewellery box's lock. It turned with a soft click, revealing a velvet interior, empty save for a faint indentation where a locket might have rested. Miss Marple's heart quickened. The key fit, confirming its connection to the locket. But what had been inside? A gem, a letter, or something more incriminating? She closed the box and left the room, her mind racing. The Colonel's denial, coupled with Polly's account of seeing him with something shiny, pointed to his involvement. But the empty box suggested someone else might have gotten to the locket first. That afternoon, she decided to observe Mr. Thorne, whose absence the previous day and sour mood intrigued her. She found him in the library, sorting through a stack of letters. "Mr. Thorne," she said, settling nearby with her knitting, "you seem quite busy with correspondence. I hope it's not bad news." He looked up, his moustache twitching. "Just business matters, Miss Marple. Nothing to trouble yourself over." But his hands fumbled, and a letter slipped to the floor. She retrieved it for him, glimpsing a crest on the envelope. A lion and rose, unfamiliar but distinctive. "Thank you," he muttered, snatching it back. "Family affairs, you understand." Miss Marple nodded, but the crest lingered in her mind. Was Mr. Thorne connected to the locket's disappearance, perhaps through some financial motive? His banking background suggested he knew the value of heirlooms. She filed the thought away, intending to research the crest later. As evening fell, the house grew restless. At dinner, Lydia dropped her fork when Colonel Bannister mentioned a war story involving stolen artifacts, his eyes flicking toward Miss Marple, as if daring her to react. Dr. Bellamy excused himself mid-meal, claiming nausea, while Mrs. Hargrove seemed distracted, barely touching her food. After dessert, Miss Marple lingered in the hallway, hoping to catch another clue. She overheard a hushed argument between Mr. Thorne and Mrs. Hargrove near the parlour. "You can't keep avoiding it, Eleanor," Mr. Thorne said sharply. "You know what's at stake." "I told you, it's gone," Mrs. Hargrove snapped. "I've looked everywhere." Miss Marple retreated before they noticed her, her suspicions deepening. The locket wasn't just a trinket. It was tied to something significant, perhaps a debt, or a secret shared between Mrs. Hargrove and Mr. Thorne. The key's discovery confirmed the locket had been opened, but by whom, and for what? Later, as she knitted in her room, Miss Marple reflected on the day. The Colonel's defensive reaction, the key's fit in the jewellery box, Mr. Thorne's mysterious letters, and the argument with Mrs. Hargrove all pointed to a complex web. She suspected the locket held a document or item of value beyond its gold and ruby, something worth risking a confrontation. Tomorrow she would push further, perhaps by engaging Mr. Thorne about his letters or revisiting the cellar for overlooked clues. The next chapter will unveil a shocking revelation that turns the mystery upside down, drawing Miss Marple closer to the truth. Chapter 7. A shocking revelation. Miss Marple rose early, her mind a whirl of questions about the tiny key, the empty jewellery box, and the heated exchange she'd overheard between Mr. Thorne and Mrs. Hargrove. The locket's disappearance was no simple theft. It was tied to a deeper secret, one that seemed to unsettle the entire household. She decided to focus on Mr. Thorne today, his mysterious letters and the lion and rose crest, suggesting a connection to the locket's contents. But she also needed to revisit the cellar, suspecting she'd missed something in her haste. Tucking her knitting bag under her arm, she headed downstairs, her sharp eyes scanning for opportunities. At breakfast, the atmosphere was thick with unease. Colonel Bannister was absent, having left a note about a morning walk. Lydia toyed with her toast, her eyes red-rimmed as if she'd been crying. Dr. Bellamy was overly chatty, discussing the weather with forced enthusiasm, while Mrs. Hargrove served coffee with a distracted air, her hands unsteady. Mr. Thorne, however, was engrossed. In another letter, his brow furrowed as he read. Miss Marple seized her chance when he stepped into the parlour to make a telephone call. leaving his satchel unattended. Pretending to adjust a cushion, she glanced at the satchel, spotting a corner of an envelope with the same lion and rose crest. Before she could investigate further, Mr. Thorne returned, his expression darkening as he noticed her proximity. "Looking for something, Miss Marple?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Oh, just straightening up," she replied, her voice airy. "I noticed your fine stationery. That crest is quite distinctive. Family heritage, I presume." Mr. Thorne's moustache twitched. "An old acquaintance, nothing more. Now, if you'll excuse me." He grabbed his satchel and strode out, leaving Miss Marple certain he was hiding something significant. With the house quiet, Lydia in her room, Dr. Bellamy out for a supposed errand, and Mrs. Hargrove in the kitchen with Polly, Miss Marple slipped back to the cellar door. The brass key was still on the kitchen hook, and she borrowed it again, her heart beating a little faster as she descended the creaky stairs. Her flashlight swept the damp space, lingering on the wooden chest, where she'd found the photograph and ruby earring. This time, she examined the surrounding crates, noticing one tucked in a shadowy corner, its lid slightly ajar. Inside, wrapped in a dusty cloth, was a small leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed with age. The first page bore the name Margaret Hargrove, Mrs. Hargrove's grandmother, the woman in the photograph. Miss Marple skimmed the entries, her pulse quickening. The diary detailed Margaret's romance with a man named Edward Bannister, a soldier who gifted her the locket in 1895. One entry stood out. "Edward hid the deed in the locket, saying it would secure our future. If anyone finds it, the land is theirs." A deed to what? Land could mean wealth, motive enough for theft. Was Colonel Bannister perhaps a descendant after this deed? She tucked the diary into her bag, knowing it was a crucial piece of the puzzle. Returning upstairs, she barely had time to replace the key before Polly rushed into the kitchen, her face pale. "Miss Marple, I need to tell you something," she whispered, glancing nervously at the door. "I overheard Mr. Thorne and Dr. Bellamy arguing in the garden just now. Mr. Thorne said, if the deed's found, we're ruined. Dr. Bellamy told him to keep quiet, but they sounded scared." Miss Marple's mind raced. A deed, mentioned in both the diary and the argument, tied Mr. Thorne and Dr. Bellamy to the locket's contents. But how did Colonel Bannister fit in? She thanked Polly and urged her to stay quiet, then sought out Mrs. Hargrove, finding her in the parlour, sorting linens with a distracted air. "Mrs. Hargrove," Miss Marple began, her tone gentle, "I've been thinking about your grandmother's locket. Could it have held something besides jewels? Papers, perhaps? Something valuable to the family?" Mrs. Hargrove's hands froze, her eyes wide. "Papers? I don't know what you mean. It was just a locket, a keepsake." But her voice trembled, and she quickly excused herself, claiming a headache. Miss Marple wasn't fooled. Mrs. Hargrove knew more than she let on, perhaps about the deed. That evening, at dinner, the tension was palpable. Colonel Bannister returned, his mood darker than usual, avoiding Miss Marple's gaze. Lydia barely spoke, her hands twisting her napkin. Dr. Bellamy dropped his glass, apologizing profusely, while Mr. Thorne dominated the conversation with forced anecdotes, his eyes darting to Mrs. Hargrove. After the meal, Miss Marple lingered, hoping to catch another clue. She overheard Lydia whispering to Dr. Bellamy in the hallway, "If they find it, what happens to us?" Before she could hear more, a loud crash echoed from upstairs, followed by a shout. The guests rushed to the landing where Colonel Bannister stood, his cane raised, glaring at a broken vase on the floor. "Blasted thing was in my way," he barked, but his eyes were wild, as if caught in the act. Mrs. Hargrove, pale, ushered everyone back downstairs, insisting it was an accident. Miss Marple retired to her room, her knitting a cover for her racing thoughts. The diary's mention of a deed, the argument between Mr. Thorne and Dr. Bellamy, and Colonel Bannister's outburst painted a picture of a hidden fortune tied to the locket. The revelation of the deed's existence changed everything. Someone in the house was desperate to claim it or destroy it. Tomorrow, she would confront Mr. Thorne about the crest and the deed, risking his anger to uncover the truth. The next chapter will bring a dangerous encounter that pushes Miss Marple closer to solving the mystery. Chapter 8. A Dangerous Encounter. Miss Marple sat by her window, the faint glow of dawn filtering through the curtains as she turned the pages of Margaret Hargrove's diary. The mention of a deed hidden in the locket had shifted her perspective. The mystery wasn't just about a stolen heirloom, but a potential fortune tied to land, one that Mr. Thorne, Dr. Bellamy, and possibly Colonel Bannister were desperate to control. The lion and rose crest on Mr. Thorne's letters suggested a deeper connection, perhaps to the Bannister family or the land itself. Today, she resolved to confront Mr. Thorne directly, using the crest as leverage to pry open his secrets. But she knew she'd need to tread carefully. His temper and the house's growing tension warned of danger. At breakfast, the dining room was a study in strained silence. Colonel Bannister ate quickly, his eyes fixed on his plate, while Lydia fidgeted with her teacup, her face pale. Dr. Bellamy was absent, leaving a note about a morning walk, and Mrs. Hargrove moved about with a forced smile, her hands betraying her nerves as she poured coffee. Mr. Thorne, however, was talkative, regaling the table with a story about a banking deal gone wrong, though his eyes darted to Miss Marple as if sensing her scrutiny. She waited until he excused himself to the parlour, then followed, her knitting bag slung over her arm like a shield. "Mr. Thorne," she said, catching him as he sorted through his satchel, "I couldn't help noticing your letters bear a striking crest, a lion and rose. It reminds me of something I read in an old diary about a family tied to this house. Might you know anything about it?" Mr. Thorne's hand paused on an envelope, his moustache twitching. "You're quite observant, Miss Marple," he said, his voice tight. "The crest is an old family symbol, nothing more. Why do you ask?" Miss Marple met his gaze, her tone gentle but firm. "Because it seems connected to Mrs. Hargrove's locket, and the deed it may have held. I heard you speaking with her about something at stake. I wonder if it's tied to that land mentioned in Margaret Hargrove's diary." The colour drained from Mr. Thorne's face, and he stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. "You're poking your nose where it doesn't belong, old woman. That diary is private, and you do well to forget what you read." He grabbed his satchel and brushed past her, his shoulder knocking her knitting bag to the floor. Miss Marple knelt to retrieve it, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. His reaction confirmed the deed's importance and his involvement. She decided to follow him, suspecting he might lead her to another clue. Keeping her distance, she trailed him as he left the house, heading toward the village. He stopped at a small post office, where he mailed a thick envelope bearing the same crest. Miss Marple lingered nearby, pretending to admire a shop window, and noted the recipient's name on the parcel, Edward Bannister, S.K. The name matched the soldier in Margaret's diary. Was this a descendant or a coincidence? Returning to the boarding house, Miss Marple sought out Polly, hoping the housemaid had overheard more. She found her in the kitchen, scrubbing pots, with a worried expression. "Polly, dear," Miss Marple said softly, "have you heard anything more about Mr. Thorne or that deed?" Polly glanced around, her voice barely a whisper. "I shouldn't say, ma'am, but I heard him and Dr. Bellamy in the parlour last night, after you went to bed. Mr. Thorne said, if the deed's found, the land goes to her heir, not us. Dr. Bellamy told him to burn it if he found it. They didn't know I was sweeping nearby." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The deed was clearly a threat to Mr. Thorne and Dr. Bellamy, but who was the heir? Mrs. Hargrove, or someone else? She thanked Polly and decided to search Mr. Thorne's room while he was still out. Slipping upstairs, she found his door unlocked, a careless mistake. Inside, his desk was cluttered with papers, including a map of local land parcels, one circled, in red with the note, Hargrove Estate. Tucked beneath it was a letter from Edward Bannister, demanding payment for services rendered, and mentioning a family claim. The lion and rose crest was embossed at the top. Before she could read more, a floorboard creaked behind her. She turned to see Colonel Bannister in the doorway, his cane raised like a weapon. "What are you doing here, Miss Marple?" he growled, his eyes blazing. "Snooping in private rooms now?" Miss Marple's heart raced, but she kept her voice calm. "I was looking for a dropped stitch, Colonel. I must have wandered into the wrong room." She clutched her knitting bag, inching toward the door. He stepped closer, blocking her path. "You've been asking too many questions. About the locket, the cellar, that cursed deed. You think I took it, don't you? Well, I didn't, but I know who did, and I'll deal with them myself." His voice was low, dangerous, and for a moment she feared he might strike her. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed in the hall. Mrs. Hargrove appeared, her face pale. "Colonel, what's going on? Miss Marple, are you all right?" Her presence broke the tension, and Colonel Bannister lowered his cane, muttering an apology before storming out. Mrs. Hargrove escorted Miss Marple downstairs, her hands trembling. "I'm so sorry, Miss Marple. He's been out of sorts lately. Please, let's have some tea." But her eyes held fear, as if she suspected what Miss Marple had uncovered. That evening, dinner was a strained affair. Lydia avoided eye contact. Dr. Bellamy was silent, and Mr. Thorne returned late, his mood darker than ever. Colonel Bannister glared at Miss Marple across the table, his warning still ringing in her ears. As she retired to her room knitting, by the window she pieced together the day's events. The map, the letter from Edward Bannister, and the Colonel's threat pointed to a conspiracy around the deed, with Mr. Thorne and Dr. Bellamy at its centre. But the Colonel's claim of knowing the thief suggested another layer. Perhaps he was protecting someone, or playing a deeper game. Tomorrow, she would confront Dr. Bellamy, using the letter and map to force the truth. The dangerous encounter with Colonel Bannister had only sharpened her resolve. The next chapter will reveal a hidden alliance that unravels the mystery further, bringing Miss Marple face to face with the locket's true thief. Chapter 9. A Hidden Alliance. Miss Marple awoke with a steely determination, the previous day's tense encounter with Colonel Bannister only fueling her resolve to uncover the truth. The map, the letter from Edward Bannister and the Colonel's cryptic claim that he knew the locket's thief swirled in her mind. She suspected Dr. Bellamy was deeply entangled in the affair, his nervous demeanour and whispered arguments with Mr. Thorne pointing to a shared secret. The deed hidden in the locket was the key, and today she would confront Dr. Bellamy, using the evidence she'd gathered to force a revelation. Tucking her knitting bag under her arm, she headed downstairs, her sharp eyes alert for any opportunity. Breakfast was a sombre affair, the dining room heavy with unspoken tension. Mr. Thorne was absent, having left early for another mysterious errand. Lydia sat quietly, her hands folded tightly in her lap, while Colonel Bannister ate with a scowl, his cane propped against his chair. Mrs. Hargrove bustled about, her smile brittle as she served scones and tea. Dr. Bellamy, however, lingered, over his coffee, his fingers tapping restlessly on his pocket watch. Miss Marple seized her moment as the others dispersed, approaching him in the parlour where he sat, scribbling notes in a small ledger. "Dr. Bellamy," she began, her voice, warm but pointed, settling into a chair with her knitting. "You seem troubled. I wonder if it's about the locket, or perhaps the deed it contained. I found a map in Mr. Thorne's room, marked with the Hargrove estate, and a letter mentioning a family claim. You and Mr. Thorne seem quite concerned about it." Dr. Bellamy's pen froze, his face paling as he met her gaze. "Miss Marple, I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, his eyes darting to the door. "Maps, deeds. You've been listening to gossip." Miss Marple leaned forward, her needles clicking steadily. "Not gossip, Doctor. I overheard you and Mr. Thorne discussing the deed, saying it could ruin you if found. And then there's this." She reached into her bag and produced the letter's envelope with the lion and rose crest, holding it just long enough for him to see. "It's addressed to Edward Bannister. Curious, isn't it, that the same name appears in Margaret Hargrove's diary tied to the locket?" Dr. Bellamy's composure crumbled. He stood, his chair scraping loudly, and paced to the window, his hands clenched. "You don't understand what you're meddling in," he said, his voice low. "That deed, it's not just about land. It's a legacy, a promise made long ago. If it's found, it could destroy everything we've worked for." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her tone remained gentle. "We? You and Mr. Thorne, I presume? Or is Colonel Bannister part of this too?" Before he could answer, the parlour door swung open, and Lydia entered, her face flushed. "Dr. Bellamy, I need to—" She stopped short, seeing Miss Marple. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." But Miss Marple caught the glance exchanged between them, a flicker of panic. "Not at all, my dear," she said, smiling. "I was just asking Dr. Bellamy about some family history. You've been here a while. Have you heard anything about a deed or an old promise?" Lydia's hands twisted her skirt, her voice barely audible. I don't know anything about that. I just came to ask about a letter." She backed toward the door, but Dr. Bellamy grabbed her arm, his grip firm. "Stay, Lydia," he said, his tone urgent. "Miss Marple knows too much already. We can't keep pretending." He turned to Miss Marple, his shoulders sagging. "All right. I'll tell you. But not here. Meet me in the garden in an hour. Alone." Miss Marple nodded, sensing the weight of his words. As he and Lydia left, she remained in the parlour, her mind racing. Dr. Bellamy's admission hinted at a conspiracy, and Lydia's involvement was unexpected. Was she an accomplice, or caught in something beyond her control? An hour later, Miss Marple stepped into the garden, her knitting bag a comforting weight. Dr. Bellamy waited by the rose trellis, alone, his face drawn. "I didn't want it to come to this," he began, his voice low. "Lydia and we're cousins, descended from Edward Bannister's sister. The deed in the locket grants the Hargrove estate to Edward's heirs. Mr. Thorne is our solicitor. He's been helping us claim it, but Mrs. Hargrove's family disputes our right. When the locket went missing, we thought she'd hidden it to keep the deed from us." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "So you and Mr. Thorne searched for it? In the cellar, perhaps?" Dr. Bellamy nodded. "We thought it might be there in that old chest, but we found nothing." Then Colonel Bannister started asking questions. He's a distant cousin too, and he wants the land for himself. He's been threatening us, saying he'll expose our claim if we don't cut him in. The revelation stunned Miss Marple. A hidden alliance between Dr. Bellamy, Lydia, and Mr. Thorne, all tied to the Bannister family, explained their secrecy. But Colonel Bannister's role was murkier. Was he the thief or another victim of the locket's lure? Before she could press further, a shout came from the house. Polly ran out, her face pale. "Miss Marple, it's Mrs. Hargrove. She's found something in her room, and she's furious." Miss Marple hurried back, Dr. Bellamy trailing behind. In the parlour, Mrs. Hargrove stood clutching a small velvet pouch, her eyes blazing. "This was under my bed," she snapped, holding up the ruby locket, its clasp broken. "Empty! Someone took the deed, and I want answers." The guests gathered, Colonel Bannister's face unreadable, Lydia trembling, and Mr. Thorne pale. Miss Marple's mind raced. The locket found, but the deed gone. Someone had acted swiftly, perhaps after her confrontations stirred the pot. As accusations flew, she caught Colonel Bannister slipping toward the hall, his cane tapping softly. Tomorrow, she would follow him and uncover his role, using the locket's recovery to force the truth. The final chapter awaits, where the thief's identity is revealed, unraveling the mystery of the Buttercup boarding house. Chapter 10. The Thief. Unmasked. Miss Marple sat in her room, the recovered locket, empty of its deed, resting on her bedside table alongside Margaret Hargrove's diary, the ruby earring, the tiny key, and the monogrammed handkerchief. The pieces of the puzzle were nearly complete, but the thief's identity remained elusive. Dr. Bellamy's confession of his alliance with Lydia and Mr. Thorne, all descendants of Edward Bannister's family, pointed to a motive tied to the deed, a document granting the Hargrove estate to Edward's heirs. Colonel Bannister's threatening behaviour and his claim of knowing the thief suggested he was either the culprit or protecting someone. Mrs. Hargrove's fury over the locket's recovery, coupled with her evasive responses, hinted she knew more than she admitted. Today, Miss Marple would follow Colonel Bannister and force the truth, unravelling the mystery once and for all. At breakfast, the dining room was a powder keg. Mrs. Hargrove's eyes were red from sleeplessness, her hands clutching a teapot as she served with mechanical precision. Lydia sat silently, her face pale, while Dr. Bellamy avoided eye contact, his fingers drumming on his watch. Mr. Thorne tried to lighten the mood with a forced anecdote, but his voice faltered under the weight of the room's tension. Colonel Bannister, however, was calm, almost too calm, sipping his coffee with a faint smirk. Miss Marple watched him closely, noting his glance toward the hall, as if planning his next move. As the meal ended, Colonel Bannister excused himself, claiming he needed to stretch his legs. Miss Marple waited a moment before following, her knitting bag a familiar prop to mask her purpose. She trailed him to the back of the house, where he slipped through a side door toward the garden shed. Hidden behind a hedge, she watched as he unlocked the shed with a key from his pocket and disappeared inside. Moments later, she heard a soft scraping, like paper being unfolded. Seizing her chance, she approached the shed, knocking lightly on the door. "Colonel Bannister," she called, her voice firm but polite. "Might I have a word?" The door swung open, revealing the colonel holding a folded document, his face a mix of surprise and anger. "Miss Marple, you've no business here," he growled, tucking the paper into his coat. Miss Marple stepped forward, undaunted. "I believe I do, Colonel. That document, is it the deed from Mrs. Hargrove's locket? The one tied to the Hargrove estate, promised to Edward Bannister's heirs?" His eyes widened, and for a moment she thought he might bolt. Instead he sighed, his shoulders slumping. "You're too clever for your own good," he said. "Yes, it's the deed. I took it from the locket, but not for the reasons you think." Before he could explain, a shout came from the house. Mrs. Hargrove stormed toward them, followed by Dr. Bellamy, Lydia, and Mr. Thorne. "You!" she cried, pointing at the colonel. "You stole it! I knew it was you!" Miss Marple raised a hand, her voice calm but commanding. "Please, let's all go inside and sort this out. I believe the colonel has a story to tell." In the parlour, with the guests gathered, Colonel Bannister began, his gruff voice steady. "I'm Edward Bannister's great-nephew. The deed was my family's legacy, meant to secure our future. Margaret Hargrove, Eleanor's grandmother, promised it to Edward, but her family hid it after his death, claiming the land for themselves. I came here to find it. 2 nights ago, I slipped into Eleanor's room, found the locket, and used the key I'd kept from my family's records to open it. The deed was inside, a legal claim to the estate." Mrs. Hargrove's face crumpled. "That land is all I have left of my family's legacy. You had no right." But Miss Marple interjected, holding up the handkerchief with HB initials. "Colonel, you left this behind, marked with red wax from the cellar. You searched there too, didn't you, to ensure no other copies of the deed existed?" He nodded. "I had to be sure, but I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just wanted what was rightfully mine." Dr. Bellamy stepped forward, his voice shaking. "You should have told us, Hugh. Lydia and I are your cousins. We're entitled to that deed too. Mr. Thorne was helping us stake our claim, but you went behind our backs." Mr. Thorne's face reddened. "You're all fools. I told you to." "Burn it, Bellamy. If that deed's filed, the estate goes to the Bannister heirs, and Eleanor loses everything." "I was trying to protect her." Lydia burst into tears. "I didn't want any of this. I only came to write, but Dr. Bellamy pulled me into this family feud. I saw the colonel sneaking around, but I was too scared to say anything." Mrs. Hargrove sank into a chair, her voice bitter. "I suspected the deed was in the locket. My grandmother told me stories, but I thought it was lost. When it went missing, I feared one of you had taken it to claim my home." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. "The truth is out now. Colonel Bannister took the deed, believing it his birthright. Dr. Bellamy and Mr. Thorne conspired to secure it for their own gain, pulling poor Lydia into their scheme. But the real crime is the secrecy that tore this house apart." She turned to the colonel. "What will you do with the deed?" Colonel Bannister hesitated, then handed it to Mrs. Hargrove. "File it legally, Eleanor. Let the courts decide. I'm tired of hiding." Mrs. Hargrove clutched the deed, tears in her eyes. "I'll do what's right, for all of us." As the guests dispersed, some with apologies, others with lingering resentment, Miss Marple packed her knitting bag, her work done. The lockets, theft had unravelled a family feud spanning generations, but the truth had set them on a path to resolution. As she boarded the train back to St. Mary Mead, she smiled faintly, already wondering what mystery awaited her next. If you've enjoyed this tale of secrets and sleuthing, please like and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us. Comment below with your thoughts on Miss Marple's adventure and join us for more stories that unravel the human heart.